Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Lady. And if I may say to my Right Honourable friend, the member for North Somerset, I also listened carefully to what he had to say, because he made one important point which has come up about the will of the people. It's absolutely right that most of us in this House voted to trigger Article 50. We did that out of respect for the result of the referendum, even if we didn't like it. But 3.5 years down the track, it's perfectly obvious to many of us that this country is going to a very bad outcome. And the longer the period that passes from the referendum, the more unclear it is, in truth, what the will of the people is. We have no idea. And that's why I've always been willing to see a deal go through, but I want it to go back to the public, because I am left with a compelling sense that we are actually taking people to a destination they don't want at all. And what has happened is, unfortunately, a section of my party has become hijacked by a narrow sector of those who voted to leave and who are simply using the will of the people as an instrument of potential tyranny towards any of those who disagree with them, as I can see in the email stream I routinely get. And I'm afraid fuelled now by the words of the Prime Minister, and indeed I have to say, I regret to have to say this, but I will, by the words of the Leader of the House today. And it was fascinating to listen to the Leader of the House. I'd always imagined that he had marketed himself in politics as an individual who formed part of the grandest tradition of old-fashioned conservatism. And so I was rather surprised when I heard him refer to one of his objections why this House should do its duty, that it would interfere with the great set pieces that followed a state opening of Parliament. Of course, as a Conservative, I love the great set pieces of our Constitution. But I don't think in a time of national emergency my constituents in Beaconsfield would have much regard for me for saying that the great set pieces had to come before my doing my duty. I also, I have to say to him, with regret, it's the first time I've heard him at the dispatch box, that I regretted his rather cheap sarcasm at the expense of my Right Honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, and I'll just gently point out he has more months of experience of high office than my Right Honourable friend has days in his job. And the truth is that the government has decided to pursue a ruthless policy of trying to shut down all debate of the most legitimate kind about the future of our country and its well-being, and in doing so, the unconstitutional acts come wholly from the government. I disagree totally with my Right Honourable friend, the Leader of the House, when he says that in some way this House is acting unconstitutionally in what it does. Our Constitution is adaptable, and I'm afraid it's having to adapt to the reality that the government doesn't have a majority and hasn't had one for some time. And that is just one of those things which happens, and it's doing it, actually, in a fairly reasonable fashion. Although it would be better if we listened politely to each other and stopped trying to beat each other over the head, as I detect is the practice which the government is now adopting. And finally, I will say this. Obviously, I believe that this motion is entirely desirable, entirely in keeping with the House's proper traditions, and is something which should be passed, and the bill that follows it, so that the evils of a no-deal Brexit are avoided, because I believe passionately that evil will follow. But I was struck by my Right Honourable friend, the Leader of the House, who suddenly referred to a man for all seasons, I think because Sir Thomas More is one of his heroes. He will recollect Sir Thomas said, when told that opposition to the King would mean death, well, these are but devices to frighten children. So I'm afraid if he thinks that the device of withdrawing the whip this evening is going to change my mind or that of my honourable and right honourable friends, he has got another thing coming, because it will be treated with the contempt it deserves.
The time limit is now reduced to 4 minutes. Tommy Shepherd.